Hello everybody, my name is Harley Combest, your host with the most, the best in the best, Harley Combest, and today I have with me my very good friend, Ryan Wellington. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And, but not really. So, Ryan is a very, very educated man. He got his BA in psychology at the University of Central Oklahoma, his BA in philosophy at Oklahoma State University, his MA in philosophy at Oklahoma State University, and his MA in theology at Ave Maria, and he is currently working on getting his Juris Doctorate at the University of Oklahoma College Law. So how does this freaky obsession of yours, this irrational obsession of yours with gaining these different segments of knowledge begin? Do explain for the audience where you come from and what are the origins of Wellington, the silly philosopher, theologian, psychologist man, lawyer.
Well, it begins with a desire to punish yourself for the rest of your life and to never enjoy happiness, to always be stressed, and to, come across people such as yourself.
That makes sense. I am a perfect individual. And math degrees are never known for being masochistic in nature. They never know.
Never.
No. But yeah, where did you start? Where were you brought up?
Yeah, I grew up in Edmond, Oklahoma. So my family moved there in '93, and then I just, started growing up, went to OCS, a private Christian school, and then from there decided to go to UCO, also in Edmond, and then from there, OSU, Ave, and then OU.
All right. So what led you to pursue psychology at first here?
I was interested in the idea of meaning, especially as it relates to religion. So I thought among the sciences that psychology has a unique perspective with the human experience and the ability to be able to explain religious experience. So my central focus was on the idea of meaning. And then once I began to find out that meaning touched significantly in other subjects, like philosophy and different aspects of theology and things, I realized that those subjects were also worth studying.
So that explains why you went over to philosophy and then theology as well. But Ave Maria University, that's a Catholic university, a very Catholic university. Mm-hmm. Were you always Catholic, or tell me what's up? What's up with the religiosity of Ryan Wellington?
Of course. Yeah, I converted in 2011. So as I was leaving high school, I realized from different books and talks that I had investigated that the Catholic religion was misunderstood popularly as well as in their academic circles. So I thought that it'd be worthwhile pursuing an honest investigation of the Catholic religion as it presents itself to be. I felt like if we're going to investigate religions, we should probably understand them from their true context instead of strawmen or false depictions of what they seem to be.
Yeah. So
that we can sincerely pursue truth instead of trying to just win an argument. So as I investigated, it became more attractive to me.
As opposed to what exactly? Where did you come from, religiously speaking?
Yes, until about 12 years old, I grew up in the RLDS church, which is a sort of Reformed Mormon church. I had the Doctrine and Covenants in the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith's Revised Bible given to me when I was baptized in that church. And then after that, at 12 years old, we moved on to Life Church and began non-denominational, evangelical sorts of stuff.
I see. So you, Mr. Philosophy Man with your philosophy shirt, you went and you studied philosophy, and you spoke a minute on discerning and going after the truth, investigating religious experience through psychology, other similar roads to meaning here, and your thesis is titled "The Problem of Doctrinal Decidability." Could you go into that? What exactly does that mean?
Of course. So it's an issue of sorting through different religions in deciding between them the probability of those religions. I tried to phrase the problem in a way that would seem practical. The analogy that was offered, or maybe more like a metaphor, was that suppose you have this one doctor who says that you're sick with some sort of terrible illness, and this illness is going to cause you a severe and significant amount of pain, and it's going to end in death. And he says that there is a cure for this illness, but it's among these pills, and it's in this pile of pills that's like on the table in front of you. And you're supposed to imagine that this doctor knows which pill it is, and he says that you can't take multiple pills because that will cancel out the effect. You can only take one, but he's not going to tell you which pill it is. In a situation like that, we probably wouldn't call the doctor good, or willing or good, or being fair, or just, or any of those descriptors. We'd probably say that he was being pretty bad, selfish, or having some sort of alternative intentions. In the same respect, it would seem to be analogous to the situation with God if there was no philosophic way of sorting between different religions. If he's just going to throw out a religion to the world, and there's going to be several competing religions, and we're not going to have philosophical tools for sorting between those different religions, then it would seem as if hell or an eternity of torment or something like that would be even worse than the sort of evil doctor scenario. So it would mean that God's goodness is questioned. It would mean that, like, maybe Calvinism could sort of come into play, where, like, God's going to determine that people go to hell sort of thing.
Yeah, because if you can't discern it by your own volition, it's like, who's to say there is any volition at all? So.
Yeah. It's like, because of the amount of choices that are presented before you with these varying religions that impact your salvation in significant ways, it's challenging to sort of find what would be the right religion in order to sort of spend eternity with God.
Yeah. And so how did you go about sort of breaking up these religions, categorizing them down into individual probabilities? How did you determine which one was probabilistically more likely to be the correct pill?
It's been a while since I've been over my thesis, so I'm going to sort of skate by on what I have a little bit of a more vague memory of. I focused on Richard Swinburne's book, Revelation. I think it's like the second edition. And in that book, he talks about how to sort through different religions philosophically. And as I remember, he describes this sorting process as being akin to like a letter. So you're going to have different traits of a letter that will authenticate that letter as coming from a certain source. And if theistic religions are revelatory, that is, they're coming from God, they're also going to be like a letter coming from God. And so if we're going to sort between those different religions, we need to sort of see what would be an authentic letter from God. So you had different characteristics such as like the seal and the signature, the contents of the letter, whether it's like the sort of thing this author would say, different things like that. And then he related those to sort of like a divine explanation of Revelation, things such as like miracles that would be a unique aspect of the purported revelation. Whether those miracles can be authenticated or not, it's the sort of thing that we would expect to see surrounding a purported revelation.
I see.
As well as like the content, the character, the ethical contents on a certain level. So you could sort of like philosophically engage with revelatory content without engaging in theology in order to sort of see, is this the kind of thing that's compatible with reason? And is this the sort of thing that is more likely than other competing religions? I tried to add on to his thesis by saying that there's also prima facie tests of that sort of stuff. For example, if you're going to have people sorting through different religions with Swinburne's analysis, that's going to be intellectually taxing. It's not going to be available to a lot of people, especially those who don't have philosophical educations. So I was saying that there's other ways that can make it more accessible to people who do a prima facie analysis.
Oh, could you explain to the audience what that means, prima facie?
Of course. So a prima facie analysis is something that's at first face. At least in philosophy, it's at first face. In other fields, it means something different. For example, in law, when we use prima facie, we're talking about usually the elements of some sort of legal doctrine. But in philosophy, it's at first face. That means that there's a strong presumption in favor of that thing. So, for example, we can say, prima facie, in this example, we would expect that an older religion might be more likely to have come from God than a newer religion. That case is just because an older religion has had more opportunities for it to have gone extinct.
Yeah.
And presumably, God would not let his religion go extinct. Therefore, prima facie, an older religion would have higher probabilities than a newer religion. And presumably, God would also want that religion to encapsulate more people for salvation than a newer religion, which would capture less over time.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the elements I offered in the prima facie case for immediately analyzing religions without diving into in-depth details about them. So it's trying to efficiently use surface facts of religions in order to develop a probability analysis that enables people who don't have the time or the intellectual resources to dive into these religions in significant detail, as Richard Swinburne offers. And so it's different things like the sort of moral character of the prophets, because God would want to express through credible prophets if he wants people to believe him, right?
Yeah.
We want a credible attorney to go to court to represent their client. We don't want an incredible one. So if we have a credible...
So what do you have against Saul Goodman?
Well, now we're being recorded. Nothing.
Yeah, and that all makes sense. You described quite well and clearly, at least in some of the contents of your thesis, on the problem of doctrinal decidability. And then you go over here to Ave Maria University, and this is in theology now, a thesis on logic and its limits in the development of dogma. Could you just sort of sum that up? What do you mean by logic and its limits in the development of dogma?
Yeah, so there was a view there at Ave. I think one of the professors was arguing for the view that dogma develops, and that it can develop by explicit logical steps. For example, a syllogism, if P then Q, P therefore Q, where if you have two premises, the first one, if P then Q, and the second premise, P, that would mean that those two premises, if revealed, would entail that the conclusion would also be revealed, or a sort of development in dogma. So they want to say that things such as doctrinal progress in the church, where we sort of draw out of the old and sort of not really add to it, but develop what's already there into something that is more clearly understood.
Yeah.
When we do that, they want to say that you can make those steps by explicit reasoning in Newman's terms, or logical deduction, or valid syllogism sort of thing.
So, similar to the way that the mathematicians would go about proving things in the universe and building up things from the axioms, explicit reasoning in that aspect. And you would argue against that.
Yes. Yeah, my critique was that explicit reasoning or deduction or syllogisms cannot guarantee logical development and progress. The reasoning behind that is because logic only preserves truth from the premises into the conclusion, and revelation is not a category of truth. It's an epistemic category, a way in which we come to know things. So, for example, when the murderer reveals himself from stepping out behind the curtain, well, it's an epistemic category. That means something is changed within my state of knowing with regard to that killer.
Yeah.
However, if I knew that he was already behind the curtain, I knew that it was true that he was there, and he steps up from behind it, it's not so much revelation anymore, because it's not something so surprising. It's significant that he's there, but it's not as significant in that surprising way.
Yeah, because you always knew he was there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in order for something to be revealed, our epistemic states have to change with respect to the thing that is revealed.
Yeah.
And that means that it's not about the thing that's true itself. It's not about the reality of the thing. It's about our seat with respect to that reality.
Yes.
If that's the case, like when we're having arguments about the development of dogma and whether logic can give you those, it means that logic does not preserve epistemic categories of things, right? Like, just because I might know premise 1 and premise 2 in a certain way, that doesn't mean I know the conclusion in the same way. Epistemic categories are not preserved through logical deduction. Instead, truth is. And that's the only thing that logic preserves between the premises and conclusion. Only the truth of the statement. So I can know the premises in a way I don't know the conclusion in another way. So it doesn't follow that if you have revealed premises that you have a revealed conclusion. Which means that you can't use logic in order to guarantee doctrinal development in the church. Logic is insufficient for that. Instead, I suggested that it was Newman's implicit reasoning, which is the means by which we can reason through doctrinal developments. It's something that isn't as formulaic as explicit reasoning or deduction. It's something that's more like automatic. He dives a lot into implicit reasoning in his Oxford Sermon 13, as well as some in his Grammar of Assent. And this is also from his book of The Development of Dogma. But yeah, implicit reasoning for him, my interpretation of it is that it's the foundation of the other sorts of reasoning. That our axioms for explicit reasoning come from implicit reasoning. That most of our reasoning throughout the day comes from implicit reasoning. That we have any development of explicit reasoning at all is just because of implicit reasoning.
So could this be sort of comparable to Carl Jung's unconscious? The farmer, like a farmer that knows something to be true, or feels that something is to be true. That's his implicit reasoning. He's not able to speak on the matter. He's not able to articulate it, but he still has that implicit reasoning towards the truth. Is that sort of akin to what you're saying here?
Yeah, I feel like I need more understanding of the unconscious to sort of compare those two views more thoroughly. But from what you said, and from what seems to be like fairly easily available from those terms, I think that they're fairly comparable. It's not as if like implicit reasoning is something that we can't always articulate, but we sort of know it's true, and we proceed by different steps knowing that something is true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, if we take spatial reasoning, like, I'm not going to have, like, a deduction to sort of say, like, if I progress at this speed or accelerate, I'm going to hit this car.
Yeah.
Or if moving over here would be a bad idea. Or if I said this thing towards my wife, she would or wouldn't like it. Like, I can proceed, like, super fast with these implicit reasoning sorts of ways of going about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Without ever engaging in explicit reasoning. And most of the time people engage in implicit reasoning all the time about the world without ever knowing how to do the explicit reasoning.
Charles Duhigg has this book, The Power of Habit, which he mentions the fact that this man who had part of his brain missing, he shouldn't by any means be able to go about his day. And it's like, it turns out he's very much able to go about his day regardless of whether or not he consciously perceives that he's opening a cabinet, getting a glass of water, etc., etc. It's because all of this stuff was habituated in a sense. But and this sort of speaks to like the inclination which people get towards everything that they do, because everything that we do isn't a conscious action that's formalized within our thoughts in such a way that I'm speaking to you now. It's more so like I guess you could just call it a feeling, an inclination, implicit reasoning. Would you say that's true? Or does that line up with what you're saying?
Yeah, I think Newman's sense of implicit reasoning is fairly complex. From my understanding of implicit reasoning, I think that, it's going to be like much more automatic and unconscious, things that we're not always aware of, but you can sort of tell that we do as rational creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know exactly how to merge some of the psychological with Newman's sense of implicit reasoning. I think there's probably like deep connections there.
Yeah.
Part of it is I don't know all the in-depth theories of the sort of unconscious psychology. And my worry is that for some of those, they're going to have additional
caveats.
Yeah, and meanings and associations in those theories for the unconscious, because it's going to proceed on levels of emotion and desire that might not always be implicit reasoning.
Well, yeah, because it's coming from a different angle, right, than what Newman approached it with. So.
Yeah. And Newman's implicit reasoning, as far as I understand it, and trying to remember back to it because it's been a couple years, it's not something that's like, it's not desire or emotion or sort of unknown motivation for things in the way that we might take a sort of Freudian sense of the unconscious, where it's like, you have this unknown desire to do something, you don't know why it is, and it's not coming to the conscience sort of thing. So it's like that sort of more diving into the nature of humanity. Newman's sense of implicit reasoning is pure reasoning, so it's not like
I see.
Emotional. That's my dilemma between the two, between the unconscious and the implicit reasoning, is that the implicit reasoning is mostly unconscious, as far as I understand it, but it's not the unconscious.
It's the reasoning segment, I guess you would say.
Yeah, it's our rational nature functioning most automatically as it's meant to do. And the fact that we have explicit reasoning is almost, in a certain sense, a sign of a defect in our natures, because we're meant to proceed most implicitly, automatically, without having to give too much thought towards this sorts of like explicit problems.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to have to give each other deductive arguments in order to persuade each other. That's a sign that something has to go wrong in our reasoning process. And so once it goes wrong, we move from the implicit reasoning, which is the primary basis of our reasoning, into explicit reasoning, where we try to articulate where something has seemingly gone wrong.
So I suppose, like, taking out the fall of humanity, looking at the way that the angels operate, instantaneous thought in a sense, would you say it would proceed like that for humanity? It's hard to sort of hypothesize about what it would be like without the fall. But it seems to me that you're saying that we proceed through things without even having to say a word, really. It's just that the guiding steps would already be there and we'd see them clearly. And our broken natures wouldn't have to begrudge themselves to use a different method to see the steps which lies before us.
That's a really good question. So I'm trying to imagine it from a place where we wouldn't be fallen, and my idea of reasoning what it would be if we weren't fallen.
Yeah. That's what's so tricky about it.
Yeah. So I think, for example, the angels have a different nature from ours, which means that, according to St. Thomas, they instantaneously grasp whatever they're attempting to sort of understand intellectually, because they're pure forms. They don't proceed by steps like we do.
Yeah.
So what we mean by rational for the Aristotelian and Thomistic thought is we mean proceeding by steps. Like we sort of, how do you walk 1 mile? It's like you walk by taking steps to get there. That's the human way. The angelic way is just like instantly sort of thing. And it's instant for them in all ways. We're just like knowing, moving, thinking, acting.
Yeah, and they didn't have to be ripped apart atom by atom in order to get there. So
yeah, beam me up, Scotty.
Yeah.
But yeah, the human way, as far as I understand it, if we were to imagine what it would be like before the fall, with implicit reasoning, is that we would definitely talk to each other, but we'd say very different things. We'd spend a lot less time trying to persuade each other, and more time just explaining what we've seen, what we've experienced, what we feel. And so it might be more like telling another only and mainly those things they don't have access to, like what we think towards them or feel towards them, or sort of what we've seen that they haven't seen. And then they would efficiently and marvelously process that information with their implicit reasoning in an incredibly efficient way, in a higher way, which would mean that almost no arguing would ever happen, if any argument ever happened, because there'd be no reason for it. It would just merely be a sense of like conveying information or asking questions sort of thing. You wouldn't have like these fights or like power struggle sorts of things. Whatever is going on with the sort of argument is that our capacity to solve problems mathematically, philosophically, whatever it is, like we wouldn't argue about things so much anymore because we wouldn't be trying to persuade each other, because we'd all be processing the information correctly. It would just be enabling each other to have access to that information.
I see.
That's what my imagination would be before the fall.
Okay. That's interesting. Moving right along then, so why did you end up going to the University of Oklahoma College Law?
So there's two reasons for that. I think first, in valuing meaning and pursuing like what's true and good and beautiful in the world, it seemed like law is a field that enables one to engage in changes directed towards justice in a peaceful, civil way. So law enables one to make great changes in the world and in society by advocating, by arguing, in these ways that enable justice to practically thrive more as a virtue. And the second way, I felt that the other degrees that I had were not as helpful for competitive employment, especially for supporting family life. So I thought that they wouldn't be as helpful. Having studied like theology and philosophy and some psychology at undergraduate level, I thought those would not be as competitive and helpful for job market stuff. So there's like a dual passion that goes on. At the same time, I know that like law is very much needed in the church and in other places, and that's something that can also be helpful for the people of God in different ways.
I see. So sort of speaking to one half of that dual passion there, the impracticality which you viewed of trying to get a job that's well paying with these degrees. Would you say, like I've talked to some professors before, and they said it was much easier in the past in comparison to what it is now. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not super in tune with the job market and how things go. When I was looking into it at the time, I was worried because I'm worried about the progression of universities getting rid of tenure track positions, as well as the value of philosophy and certain topics in philosophy at the university level, as well as the value of orthodox theology at the university level and private universities, how long they might be around, what might happen to them. So it seemed like it was a little bit more of a risky and sort of bleak future, and I didn't see that as the only means whereby I could contribute back to the church by being at the university level with those degrees. It's hard, unless you're teaching, to sort of use those degrees in a way that pays well, and even if you're teaching, that doesn't always pay well.
Yeah.
So I thought it would be helpful to have a much more employable degree, so I could at the same time utilize the law degree and hopefully the other degrees, whether in the same job or in different jobs, or in volunteer positions and stuff. So
it makes sense. All right, getting to something with a bit more brevity, let's say.
Okay.
You win back. No, but okay. So, out of all the ancient philosophers, who would you say were your top three favorite?
That's really hard. Only ancient philosophers?
Yeah. We'll progress. We'll go ancient, medieval, modern.
Oh no.
Heck, we're gonna ask who your favorite psychologist is. You know?
Okay.
We're gonna be like the FBI in those movie scenes. I want to know where he lives. I want to know exactly what he's doing. If this man happens to poop a sneaky, I want to know about it immediately. Yeah, it's like stuff like that. Well, we're not gonna investigate that too. No. Yeah, okay. But
do you want a picture?
I'm good. Not the FBI. But they might want it.
Yeah.
But yeah. Don't escape. Don't escape the trap I put you in, where you have to name three exclusively in the ancient era that you would say meet your Ryan Wellington hierarchy.
So Aristotle, definitely. My favorite of his is Nicomachean Ethics. Plato, definitely, and his Socratic dialogues. Those are fun. And some of Epictetus. I appreciate some of his psychological insights, not so much his metaphysical insights.
Yeah.
So like his idea of focusing on what you can control or can't control as a basis for sort of moving more through your life. I think a lot of his insights are sort of apt for a lot of contemporary psychologists.
Yeah. I mean, metaphysics, do your duty. I mean, you're going to die and become dust anyway, so just do your duty. That's all you're ever gonna be. No soul, nothing.
Oh no, you sound a little Kantian.
Yeah. So what exactly about the metaphysics of Epictetus, the Nicomachean ethics struck you as what stood out? What's stood out about it? You know? I mean, it's like there's Foucaultian ethics. That could be. No, there's not. But go ahead.
Yeah. Again, it's been a while since I've been in the Nicomachean ethics, but its focus on virtue and happiness, as well as like relationships and friendship and growing in virtue, it seems like he ties it really well with human nature. And he focuses on like one of the few constants that we have in this world, right? Which is human nature. Like that hasn't changed, and it's not going to change until there's some sort of like, miraculous event. One of the few things we can kind of rely on is human nature at this point.
What? But that's completely changeable. Everything is relative and absolutely alterable. Isn't that the case?
Well, not for Aristotle. But yeah, and that means that if our human nature is fairly constant, what makes us happy is also fairly constant, right? Like progressing in character, which is the main thing that we can do that's under our control. There's other things too, like, wealth and provisions of various sorts, reputation in society, a sense of sociability, but those are not in our control. So it's more like focusing on our character, making sure that we're virtuous persons who excel in our capacities.
Now, whenever you say happiness, what do you mean by that? Like, do you mean it's just like a feeling? Like, explain. What is it? What is Aristotle in his Nicomachean Ethics? What does he mean by happiness?
Definitely. In order to represent him accurately, it would be helpful to read his direct definition. But in the absence of reading that, I'll only say my vague memory of, just so I make sure not to misrepresent a philosopher. My general understanding of it.
He's dead.
I'm not yet. His general understanding of happiness, from what I remember, is a mode of existing. So it's like existing excellently in a certain way. It's not just like a sense of pleasure or feeling. It's a mode of being, where one is sort of doing what is good and enjoying doing what is good, and also having what is necessary and provisionally prepared for them and available for them, sort of thing. So it's like a way of being, and within that way of being, you can have what we would call happy moments or down moments sort of stuff, but it's more like a way of being that's more constant, and it's sort of set and attuned to the habits, the virtues.
So it's sort of joy to life, a joy to being, even with the pain.
Yes, I think it incorporates the attitude of joy. I think it also incorporates additional levels of existing. So one of the things about Aristotle's ethics was that the sort of godlike man is the one who does the good so easily as a disposition of his habits and enjoys doing it, that it would be strange for him to do something that is wrong.
Yeah, and C.S. Lewis actually has a good point on this, where he talks about the habits which make up the virtues of man as he proceeds into eternity. And I suppose purgatory then would be sort of like that place where you'd sift through all of the habits that you'd accumulated and filter it through into those which were truly virtuous, to be formidable, worthwhile of living in a life of eternity. So yeah, that makes sense. No, it doesn't.
Okay.
Right. So what is it about the Socratic dialogue? So yeah, you mentioned why you found Nicomachean Ethics to be of value to you, and why some parts, not the metaphysical parts, because of Epictetus, you found to be worthwhile. So what about the Socratic dialogues? You said it was fun. What do you mean by that? You're wearing a philosophy shirt, so I can only assume that means horrible things. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So it's been even longer since I've dived into Plato's Socratic dialogues. So I'll be even vaguer. Or more vague.
Okay. That's fair. That's fair. Actually, if you want, you can go through some of them right here.
Yeah? How much time do you have?
No. Please don't unsubscribe. No, but do continue.
I appreciate the method with which he sort of pursued philosophy and the way in which he encountered the sophists. It wasn't just like trying to win a debate. It was sort of diving down deep into the issues and seemingly disproving a lot of relativistic tendencies in the sophists. So a lot of his Socratic project, it seemed, was the way in which he dialogued and engaged with the sophists, and not always just what he said, because, there's earlier Socrates, there's later Socrates, and he doesn't really seem to, agree with himself if he's going to make the sophist contradict themselves. But, yeah, like his method of engaging philosophy and diving into, like, the forms and matter and these sorts of things, it seems like he engages these questions on a deeper, better level, and kind of like dives into those in the conversations.
Yes, certainly, and we'll be actually doing an episode over the later works of Plato, because I don't think those are actually paid attention to as much as they really should. So we're talking about like the laws and stuff like that, because it's like everybody's seen the Republic. It's like, and don't get me wrong, it's good. Laws is better. No, but that's and you get to see like a fully matured Plato in all of his thoughts and whatnot. You get to see the full flourishing of his ideals. Even around the time wherever he actually tried to apply some of his ideals to Sicily. Whenever he went over there to Syracuse and tried to go from philosophy to law. So yeah, that's something you have in common with Plato. Do you feel flattered enough?
Oh, yes.
Okay, now I gotta break you down. Listen here. Okay, ancient. Now let's go to medieval. 3, if you can.
Okay. Definitely St. Thomas Aquinas. First one.
The big ox.
Yes. Yeah, the Orthodox theology and diving into questions in an Aristotelian way, which is profound and is useful for all life of the church. St. Thomas Aquinas especially. After that, I think St. Anselm is interesting. I don't know as much about him as I would like, but he is interesting with some of the stuff he says. The ontological argument from him captures most people's attention.
Could you go over that?
Oh, snap.
If you could.
Yeah, so there's several versions to the ontological argument. Some would think that St. Anselm has 2 versions written there. Descartes also has his version. Plantinga goes into, a contemporary philosopher, he goes into the modal ontological argument. You'll find various versions of the ontological argument with various philosophers throughout history. But St. Anselm, if I can remember correctly, was something like, it was along the lines of conceivability, so like that than which no greater can be conceived. So if you can sort of conceive of a God, but that God doesn't exist, then it would seem that he can conceive of something greater, namely one that does exist. Which would mean that if you're going to conceive of either the greatest conceivable being, as some people say, or that than which no greater can be conceived, if you're going to have that idea of God, and it's greater to exist than to not exist, then by definition, if it is greater to exist, and he is the greatest thing you could conceive of, or no greater thing you could conceive of, then he must exist on some level. He must have existence.
All right.
I don't know.
It's good enough.
There's various like presentations of it.
It's good enough quality for my audience.
Okay.
My audience. I mean, like, picture what kind of person would listen to this show, and then you can picture what exactly my audience is like.
Okay.
Exactly. It's don't think about it.
I better unsubscribe.
Yeah, exactly. It hurts. It hurts. But okay. So you got Aquinas, Anselm. Third one.
Mm.
Do you have a third one?
Yeah, this is a little bit harder. There was like different selections we read of different philosophers in that time.
Augustine. No?
Well,
well.
I don't know if he's considered medieval or not because of like was it 400s or something? I think he was writing.
He's writing it around the fall of the Roman Empire, so.
Yeah. See, if you capture that into the medieval, I would definitely include Augustine.
Okay. Augustine? Is that how you say that? Not Augustine? Augustine? No? Alright. Everybody knows he's German. No. Okay, moving right along here. Medieval. Well, actually, no, why Augustine? Why Augustine if you had to pick him?
So his passion and what he writes is beautiful. His view of like the fall is interesting, especially his view of human nature. He seems to have a very negative view of human nature, and St. Thomas, from my interpretation, seems to have a more positive view of human nature.
Yeah, I remember Augustine. He beats himself up a lot. He has an entire book beating himself up a lot. He's like, whenever I was young, I went out and I stole things from somewhere, and it wasn't mine, and that was because I was evil. And it's like, oh, there is a man who self-reflects for a few hundred pages. So yeah, with vigor. So yeah, definitely a more negative view of human nature. Would you say it's like on par with Dostoevsky's sort of view of human nature then? Of just humanity.
Oh, right.
Where Dostoevsky actually goes and he's like, humanity could be defined as the whiniest, most ungrateful creature to have ever existed on the face of the earth.
I mean, that sounds compatible with Augustine's view.
Yeah. It's compatible with my view of my audience. Let's.
Whoa.
But yeah, it's my show. It's mine. Okay, so to the modern philosophers. You got ancient, medieval, modern.
Yeah.
So top three heavyweight champions in the modern philosophical domain. Go.
Clarifying question, if that's right.
Yeah.
A lot of people will teach modern as in philosophy will teach modern as distinct from contemporary. So as far as those, do you want me to include a separate category for modern and contemporary, or just contemporary?
Actually, that's a good point. Let's go modern and then contemporary.
Okay.
Because, modern, that's like World War II sort of stuff, and it's kind of weird to compare those days to now, even though they're so close. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think, so in modern philosophy, not to say that I always agree with them, but I appreciate some of their strategies and thoughts and projects. So I thought Descartes is unique and interesting. That doesn't mean I think he has a lot of things right.
So you think he's right about everything?
No.
Oh.
He's wrong about a lot of things. But he's very interesting, and from engaging in a graduate seminar about him and his other writings in his life, I think a lot of him is misunderstood and not always presented in the best light. That doesn't mean his arguments succeed, but I think there's a nobility there that a lot of people don't recognize about his life and his philosophical projects. And he is still discussed a lot, which means that he was brilliant. So I think he's a unique person in modern philosophy. Also in modern philosophy, I don't agree with Berkeley, of course, but Berkeley's fun. He's unique. His ability to sort of discard the physical world is interesting.
Well, his simulation argument, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's clever. So I thought that he was...
It's kind of weird they named it would be kind of weird if they named a university after a man who was unclever, you know? It's like, let's name it after that guy. just pick some dude on the street. We'll name the university after him. Berkeley. Berkeley, yeah. It's a fun name. Everything's in a simulation. Shut up. No. But, yeah, that's, so you got here Descartes. Never put the horse before Descartes. And then you have Berkeley. And who else?
And probably Kierkegaard.
Whoa.
So
why is that?
So I'm not an existentialist, and I haven't
I was about to say, that's what makes him so different from the other two that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't read a ton about him, but from what I have looked at, it looked like he was very much into grappling with suffering on a certain level, and also reconciling the Christian message with that. And I like the sort of existential struggle that people have with suffering, and not really the sort of logical and intellectual struggle.
Yeah. All right. So now we go to contemporary.
Yeah.
Do offend everyone.
Okay.
No. Top 3 philosophers you don't like.
Oh, snap.
No. Is that too much?
There's a lot of bad philosophers.
Most of them come from France. No. I think I looked at the Anchor statistics, and I actually saw, I think, one person from France. So sorry, one person from France. I'm not actually sorry. Yes. No. Just go on with your 3 favorites. Let's not mix things up too much.
Sure. Richard Swinburne, definitely.
What causes him to burn as he swims?
Well, I guess I'll have to ask him. I don't know.
Oh.
But yeah, I appreciate his defense of the Christian faith in the analytic circles, reviving, good discussions of religion in the analytic camp of philosophy, in ways that weren't wholly atheistic and biased in those ways.
I see.
So giving theism a real defense.
So up next, I presume, Bertrand Russell. Okay, but more seriously, analytically, you said analytical philosophy camp. That implies there's more, Most of all of the other camps are dead, in which case it's not a good trip for anybody involved, especially the Scouts. Yeah, but they don't make boys anymore. They just make little androgynous amoebas. But let's get on to 2 big camps here. A Tale of Two Cities. You got the analyticals, the analytical philosophers in one camp, continentals in the other. Explain the difference in between the two.
So yeah, as far as I understand them, the analytic tend to focus on a strong use of logic and precise definitions, and focusing on what we mean by certain questions in order to sort of solve those questions. So there's going to be a level of simplicity and use of fewer words, only words that are necessary, and strict logical analysis for our questions. That's what I understand of the sort of analytic camp. It's very much focused on that logical rigor in the hope that we will get good progress with those questions and strong arguments. The continental side, as I understand it, is going to be more exploration and experience-based, creative use of metaphors and other ways of getting at the world in order to derive meaning from it. So in my experience, it's going to be providing you with more senses of gratification from discussing the world and thinking about the world in these different ways. And the analytic field is going to be more focused on what's true about something in a smaller definitional sort of way about the world.
I see. Which of those two just so happens to like the mathematicians more? I can probably guess, but you tell me which of those 2 camps.
Well, Analytica?
Okay, that's good enough. Good night, folks. And you've determined exactly who the better camp is. Undeniable, insofar as I'm concerned. But okay. So you got Swinburne over here, whose ideas really contributed to your thesis. So who's next? Who are you next to?
Oh yes, Swinburne, Kripke. I'm trying to remember. I heard it said more.
I wish I heard his last name said more, because I don't know. I was like, how is that spelled? Nobody knows. Google it. How? It's one of those things. I mean no disrespect until I do. But do continue. No, I'm messing with you. Kripke.
Yeah. I appreciate his use of metaphysics and discussion of language, especially in the philosophy of language. I remember liking his when we were going over that in classes. So yeah, I think he's pretty cool.
So what particular about the philosophy of language, insofar as Kripke is involved, did you find most interesting?
So I think in our discussions he also had like another version of the ontological argument, which I thought was interesting. But also like what it means to like refer to something in language, meaning and reference and that sort of stuff.
I see.
So, yeah.
All right. And now we get to the last philosopher.
Mm-hmm.
The last one.
Oh my.
All the other ones are gone.
Yeah.
They've been raptured. This one's contained in a glass vial with breather holes. Not like the rabbits that I used to keep, unfortunately. Do continue. All right. Name your guy, and then get off my show.
Okay. Maybe I'll choose a Thomist. Maybe I'll say Thomas Joseph White.
Not Thomas Joseph Black?
Nope.
Oh, I see. Okay. So why is Thomas Joseph White so important to you?
I appreciate his clear arguments, analysis, and engagement.
Clear arguments.
With Thomistic philosophy and theology. He writes a lot of books that are easily accessible, and I've met him a little bit and seen him talk several times, especially when I was studying in Florida. So.
What idea of his stuck out to you the most?
One of his talks on beauty was interesting to me. Beauty as a transcendental. Kind of trying to identify what beauty is and how something is beautiful. It's really tricky, it seems, especially with the contemporary state of art.
Yeah. It's like, could it be symmetry? Well, look at a Pollock painting.
Yeah.
For some reason, people find that beautiful.
Yeah, and St. Thomas has some things to say about beauty. I don't know if I remember all of what they are, but there's like certain senses of symmetry and proportionality and like a certain sense of right order.
Yes.
But contemporary art doesn't seem to have that as much. That doesn't mean I appreciate a lot of contemporary art, though. So.
Yeah. Is it actually beauty?
I mean, it seems to sort of people's perspective of what beauty is strange, right? On the one hand, oh sorry.
Yeah, and it's like, and beauty isn't necessarily what everybody happens to agree that it is.
Yeah.
If you're talking about it as something that's transcendental, right? So it's like by definition, just because a bunch of people say that a banana taped to a wall is pretty and the pinnacle of human art doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah, and there's like a question of like whether art is something that needs to be beautiful too.
Yeah.
Which is, I feel like it's like an intense subject because on the one hand, like art is expressive of experience on a level and gives insight of things in a way that we don't normally think about.
That's some might say that that's the artist's purpose, right? To express that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like diving into human experience and perceptions of the world that we don't have access to, and sort of contemplating things in a unique and new way. But beauty seems to be like something more than that. It seems to be like something more connected to purpose.
Yeah.
It's like something with a purpose, with a certain sense of like order.
Yeah. That's actually critical. It's transcendental nature, order, absolute. Like there is an absolute beauty, and you can see it.
And it's kind of like, Plato talks about
Forms, yeah.
the forms, but also like beautiful minds.
Mm-hmm.
So like beauty is tricky, right? It's like beauty
And the beast.
Well, it's like how beauty resides, like not merely in the thing beholds, but in the one who beholds it in a certain way, and how they behold it in a certain way. In the same way that there's things to be grateful for, but gratitude comes from the person who expresses it. And
yeah, it's like you're looking at a shining diamond from across the room, and there's aspects about the diamond, sure, but you also have lenses over your eyes, and those can be adjusted this way, to and fro, and such as you go throughout your life. And so it's the perfect combination of both the elements of the diamond itself that you're viewing from across the room, as well as the alignment of the lenses, which make the thing whole in beauty.
Yeah. So it's like, it's hard to know exactly where the beauty is in a lot of different ways. It's like a coming together of things in a certain way that makes something beautiful. It's like rare that someone would say that a sunset is not beautiful, especially if it's like in a certain way. But somehow it is. And it's hard to know exactly what that means when we say something is beautiful. Usually, it inspires some sense of like wonder and awe towards things, and it gives us a sense and a feeling that, or a reaction towards the thing, which inspires us to a higher purpose.
Yeah. And it also depends, to quote Bill Clinton, on what is.
Yeah. Oh, the definition of is something that is very much, it's very deep in philosophy and theology. Especially if you're going to talk being with, I think Heidegger. I think it was Heidegger. As well as like, God's name, I am, or being itself, or pure act.
Mm-hmm.
So
metaphysics.
Yeah, so the nature of is something that is like really, really deep. But beauty is really interesting. It's really hard to understand exactly what it is. Like when we say something is true, we just mean it corresponds to reality, right? When we say something is good, it fulfills its function properly, like Aristotle, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we say something is beautiful, that's like a lot harder to sort of think about.
Yeah.
What does it mean for a thing to be beautiful? We seem to mean that in a certain sense, it is what it's supposed to be, which seems like goodness. Like, for example, we don't usually call something disfigured beautiful, in appearance at least, because it's not what it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, if someone is genetically abnormal in a certain way that causes disproportions and stuff like that, we're going to say at least the bodily presentation of the person might not seem beautiful, because it's not sort of falling into the sort of telos that we would have with the body. But then it's hard to know what the difference is between something good and something beautiful then. So it seems like it almost like overlaps with goodness in a certain sense.
Yes.
Something is what it's supposed to be. But then it also doesn't overlap with it, because it's hard to know what something, like, why is it supposed to be beautiful? Is like something coming together supposed to be that way, or is it just is? And so when we have something that's like the experience of beauty, that is, it seems to me, one of the most awe-inspiring and wonder-producing moments that one can have, that seems to be most unexplainable compared to the other two transcendentals of the true and the good.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like certain revelations of the true and the good are themselves beautiful, right? So, like, for example, if we have, like, a child being born, that's something beautiful. If we have, like, an exposure of certain kinds of truths, that's going to be a beautiful exposure of the truth. If we're going to have certain good acts done, we might say that those acts being done are beautiful too, like certain acts of love. And so it's like they're each caught up with each other in a certain way, but it's really hard to understand what beauty is.
Perhaps as something would appear to be in heaven.
Yeah.
Appear. But I mean, if something's truly beautiful, then it goes more, it's not just skin deep, right? So, yeah. And so that's why you break down the beauty onto different layers and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, figuring out like how it can be broken down too, like what proportions, what order, what balance, what it's supposed to be, sort of thing. And like what artificial things are beautiful too. Like we can see beautiful things in nature, right? Like we can see that a person might present themselves beautiful in a bodily sense if they're sort of like healthy and well ordered, working out sort of stuff.
We can also see Botox. It's something quite common in today's society.
But then, like, we have, for example, the Mona Lisa or something like that. It seems that people agree that that's beautiful. And that's an artificial production of something. So it's not in nature. And it seems like, a lot of things can be, like, beautiful. But, like, why?
Because I said so.
I mean, there is a field of aesthetics and philosophy. And to be honest, I haven't dived in that very much at all. I just find those questions like interesting. Like most of my investigations have been in philosophy of religion, but I think aesthetics would be interesting to think about more.
All right. So as far as like the segments of the show breakdown, we've reached the last step here. If you had any words of wisdom which you wanted to carry on to my audience, as displeasing as they may be, they are still my audience. I own them. No. Lose subscribers. Yes, but words of wisdom to my audience. Life lessons you wanna speak about. Anything, right there. Go.
It seems to me a lot of people stray from philosophy when they try to win arguments instead of believing the truth. In my experience, humility and a strong moral character is as much necessary to believing the truth as is a keen mind and a high IQ. So if someone's really going to find the truth and follow the truth, they're going to need the character and the conscientiousness, the persistence and the humility to admit wrong, and the curiosity to be open to other people's perspectives, especially those they oppose, in order to actually find the truth. People need strong moral character more than they think, and because we are humans who are not merely minds, in my view, we need strong moral character in order to fully grasp the truth itself. So if we're going to be good philosophers, or whatever we're going to do, we need character, and we need sincerity, we need humility, and we need to focus on believing what is true instead of just trying to be right or powerful.
That's a good message, especially for my audience. And it's been quite a pleasure to have you on the show. And you have a good one.
Thank you. Me too, really.
Get out!